If you will, we'll go ahead and get started with our interview. If you would, please join me in welcoming Dr. John Green to Jacksonville. Before we'll get started, let's go ahead and introduce the board. Ms. Kelly,
Hey, I'm Kelly Pierce.
I'm Emily Sims.
David Glass,
Steve Smith.
And Mike Poe.
and we're just some logistics. We're trying to keep it to an hour and a half if possible, 2 hours at the max. I think we were close to the 2-hour mark last night, so if you need a break or anything, just let us know. And if any of you guys need breaks, just holler. We've got 6 really great candidates, and we're excited about your interest in Jacksonville. And our mission is to find the best fit possible for our school system going forward, so we're excited that you're here. If you don't mind, to get us started, give us a brief history, your work history, education history.
Yes, Mr. Glass, thank you and the board for selecting me as one of the 6 to be interviewed. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's been a great day so far. I've enjoyed my time with Mr. Neighbors and visiting the schools and meeting the teachers and the staff. And you have a lot of very, very friendly folks and excited and passionate people for what they're doing and working with the kids. And so it's been a great day so far. So a little bit about me. I was born in Germany. I was raised a military child. I was one of 4 children. My dad served 2 tours in Vietnam. And then he went to school on GI Bill and then became a teacher, and I actually had him as a math teacher at my high school in Murray County, which is near Dalton. And so northwest Georgia and northeast Alabama have a lot of similarities. And so after going through high school, I was actually had a recruitment letter from Jacksonville State University and Gardner-Webb. So as a football player, that was something that was meaningful to me. But I received an academic scholarship to go to Chattanooga, UT Chattanooga, and actually was a walk-on football player there. And early in my educational career, I wanted to be a computer scientist. But one of my coaches said that I should consider the education profession because I would be good at that. And I stopped playing ball because I really wasn't big enough to play the position I was there for. And so I became a tutor. And so I started my first educational experience tutoring the athletes there and working for the athletic department in that capacity. Became a math teacher, worked in DeKalb County, Georgia. Was recruited to coach and teach in that school district in the early 80s. Spent 5 years there and then met a girl, but I met her before the 5 years was up. She was from Gwinnett. And so we've been there since for most of my educational career. And I served as a teacher and as an assistant principal and as a principal and as an area superintendent, and then I retired. And so my daughter was accepted to the University of Alabama, and then I decided I would retire from Georgia and try to find a job in Alabama. And I did. And so I was able to go to Madison, Alabama at that time and help open James Clemens High School. And it was a great experience, and we had done a lot of that type of work in Gwinnett. But in Madison, it was their first high school since Bob Jones. And so opening a second high school was a great experience and something where we formed we formed a lot of important things moving forward, and the school has done exceptionally well. I was recruited to come back to Georgia and then took a superintendent job at Jackson County Schools. And left that experience because our laws changed that wouldn't allow me to continue in that capacity and also receive benefits. And so I chose to continue to receive benefits since I'd started that in 2011. And then since that time, my dad passed away, and I served as an executor of his will, and then spent a lot of time doing a lot of those things that go with that, and then have also worked as an independent consultant, primarily in the area of team development, performance management, and leadership for young people, as particular students from a community base. And have looked at a couple of superintendent positions in Alabama and have been close a couple of times as terms of being selected. And as we know at this point, it's about fit. And so this one is very intriguing to me, but I've really enjoyed my experience so far. and look forward to answering more questions and gaining some more understanding of this excellent school district that you already have.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody have anything before we go into the questions? Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Each board member is kind of assigned a question, and we'll just rotate it through. There may be a follow-up question, you know. Steve, you're up first.
As superintendent of a school system, a large portion of the day is devoted to making numerous decisions that involve multiple stakeholders. Describe your decision-making style and provide a few examples of strategies you've used in different situations with various stakeholders.
I think first, Mr. Smith, from a framework perspective, I really look at why, and I look at who, I look at what and how and when. So I really look at those 5 variables in terms of the context that the decision demands. I also look at the stakeholders that are most directly involved or most directly affected. And so I think anytime you want to make a good decision, you've got to think about the context, and you've also got to think about who it affects the most. And I think that's okay.
That's happened several times.
That means I've answered long enough on that question. No, that was good.
Thank you, Mr. Neighbors.
Yeah. I think that when it's something that's a safety issue, that takes a little bit more immediate response. I think when it's something that related to prioritization, a budget process, an instructional decision, a direction, you need to take the ample time to make a good decision. Most of the decisions that we have to make in education are not of the urgent matter. And so, especially depending on your role and responsibility. So I keep that in mind too. But I think it's important as a superintendent that you are willing to make a decision. But I think it's doubly important that you have a lot of inclusion in that process.
Okay, any follow-up to that? All right, we'll go to number 2, Mike.
Explain how you would develop a school system budget, and tell us who you would involve and how you would involve them. And as a follow-up, how would you prioritize cuts to the budget if necessary?
Yeah. In terms of budget development, Mr. Poe, I've had an extensive amount of experience in that area, and the first thing is really to start with your core values, and focus on students and what's in the best interest of students, and then really trying to make sure the budget reflects support of those core values. Then I think in doing so, you also have to develop the priorities. And for us, one of the things we always did in prioritization of the budget was we took safety, and that was our first priority. So student safety and staff safety was extremely important, and made sure we had the allocation of funds for that. Second, in terms of prioritization, historically for me has been instruction and improvement of instruction. And if it doesn't fall within those 2, then it's going to be something that we've got to spend a little bit of time thinking about. A third one is participation. So does this increase opportunities for students? So it's kind of a support of the instruction. We can have a lot of different activities that we may support, but should that be part of our prioritization? After we get through those first 3 things, safety, instruction, and participation, my experiences then have been anything after that was based if revenue was sufficient. So it was revenue dependent. So we would explore something or put something in the budget, but we may not totally tie to it if monies weren't available. Then that helps us if we've got to make a cut, because we've already placed it in a category that was revenue dependent. And so I think that having that prioritization developed with various stakeholders is extremely important. And then you start communicating what those priorities are so that everybody has a real clear understanding of where those monies go. I had a good friend tell us one time, he said, behind every dollar we spend, we see the face of a child. And so that visual, for me, was very impactful. And it really helps when you're having to come in and talk to somebody who's really passionate about a particular program, but it may not be something that fit in our priorities. I also like to do long-range planning so that at least have a 3-year cycle so that there's some guaranteed expenditures or pretty close to guaranteed expenditures that you can already anticipate. And then think forward in terms of, what the revenue streams are going to be, and then, look at increasing your efficiency for operations. That's usually where, our best cost savings can be. So it's a lot more complex than that.
Absolutely.
Response.
So
It
as,
gives you some.
and you may have, I think this is part of your answer, but just to clarify, prioritizing cuts if necessary to the budget.
Yeah. Well, one thing that we did, I had experience in when we had to go through a 15% cut is, I said, let's start at the basics. So what's our instructional safety percentage of our budget? And what we were able to do is, without changing class size and without compromising any type of impact to the learning environment itself, we recognized that 57% of our total budget was focused on instruction. And so I said, now, let's see what we've got to have to support that. Because that was going basically at a bare minimum budget without food, without transportation, without administration, without all the things that we have that have to support. And then see how we could cut those areas to make sure we maintain that focus on the learning environment created by the teacher and the student. So that's how we sort of approach that prioritization process for cuts that had already been established, though, because of our priorities for expenditures, focused on safety and instruction first. So those all should align and tie together.
Thank you.
Okay, any other follow-up? Okay.
Can you just provide some examples of how you communicate the priorities of the budget to stakeholders?
Yes. One of the things that any kind of communication possible, but I actually have done like a monthly newsletter, a monthly letter to the community that was posted on the website in terms of the budget. Then we also had open hearings on the budget. One of the things that we did in Gwinnett, we actually had what we call area board meetings, and it's a lot, it's a large district, but we would share the presentation of what our priorities were, what our expected revenues were going to be and expenditures and so forth, and then share that and have that document available on the website and so forth. And some of the things that's already being done here as well. And so, and starting the process early enough. So if you want input for the stakeholders, like we'd start right away because we've got to get ready for 2016. So in order to do that, we'd start talking to folks now in small groups. We also then created a committee that was like a central office committee that had participation from various stakeholders, including the board. And that was very beneficial as well. So we had a small group of folks that really knew the ins and outs of how the budget was going to be developed and how we were going to start to communicate that as we move forward.
Okay, any other follow-up? All right, Ms. Kelly, you're number 3.
What experience do you have with incorporating technology with teaching and learning, such as our One to World initiative?
Yeah, I've significant experience in that area. I guess to make it most current and most relative to where we are here, I'll go back to the experience with James Clemens High School. So as we were putting that school together, the key for us was to make sure we had access. So we did a lot of work in the digital plumbing. We did a lot of work in terms of the broadband and so forth that we were going to make available for the students. We focused a lot on the mobility, much more so than devices. Devices were important, but they weren't our driving force in terms of the instructional inclusion of the technology. So the other thing we did is we sort of said, okay, how can we support these various learning environments and with the technology that we have available? And so we redesigned and redefined what a library would be and, focused on a media center concept and actually took a person and put in that role that had experience in student projects based on technology, student inclusion and collaborative teams that worked around those various technology-based projects. in Gwinnett, we were at the forefront of some of the project-based technology and robotics that was taking place in the state. I hired a teacher that was from Massachusetts who had been there in instructional technology teacher of the year. And he helped bring a lot of that forward thinking in terms of programming and so forth, and the various areas of the STEM projects and so forth. He brought a lot of that to our system, which ended up bringing a lot of that to the state. And so I've had a lot of experience with that. And in fact, and this will date me a little bit, but even early in the early 90s, before we got into the mobile devices as much, we were doing a lot of work with the video work and the creation of the videos. And you may remember the Blu-ray discs and all that kind of stuff. And so we were doing a lot of that kind of stuff even back then. But it's an exciting time. But, technology is a great thing, but it'll never replace the teacher. And so I still remain committed to the one-to-one connection that teachers make on a personal level with students as being the most important part of the educational experience. So,
Okay, there's your second part.
okay.
How would you annually evaluate the effectiveness of teaching and learning with technology?
Yeah, I think this is where you've got to make a distinction between correlation and causation. There's a lot of correlation studies that show that if students are involved with learning that increases their use of technology, that they actually understand the concepts better. And but I think that you can't automatically say that that's the cause of their improvement. And so I think that you can look at usage, you can look at sort of before and after kind of feelings that people have. It's an interesting time because we have the students, a lot of them are what we call digital natives, and the teachers are not. And so, and I understand what that means because I was a language native and my mother was not. So I remember the frustration she had trying to teach me English when she didn't know it. So I think there's some things we have to address even before we get to the evaluation part. It's almost like we're on this journey in a collaborative manner that takes the know-how of our students, who may be more expert at this than we are as adults. And how do we make sure that's taking place? So if we evaluate the student experience as much or more than the teacher experience is probably the way to look at it. I don't have the total answer on this one, to be honest, but at least hopefully I've shared a little bit about my thoughts and philosophy in this area. I think that you can make relative comparisons of performance in a lot of data points, but it's difficult to do that with technology. So I think we still have to work on that one.
All right.
So.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, question number 4, Ms. Emily?
Superintendents understand that at the end of the day, student growth and achievement is ultimately what matters. Describe your experience in developing, implementing, and evaluating curriculum and instructional programs to raise student achievement.
Thank you, Dr. Sims. I think this is of paramount importance because I really do believe we're in a shift of teacher-centered instructional delivery to one that's student-centered empowerment and environments that make for the best possible development for our young people. We have access to content through technology, and so the teacher doesn't have to be the prime source of the content, but the teacher does have to be the facilitator for that experience. One of the things that we were successful in doing is moving our high school from what I would call a group of independent contractors in individualized rooms teaching individual subjects to schools within a school that were focused on teamwork and where the teachers owned the performance of the students as a collective group. So it became more important how well the language arts teachers of 10th grade, how well the 10th grade students did as a whole. And there were just a lot of things we did, you know, that was called back then PLCs. We never really called it PLCs, even though we went through all those trainings and hosted a national conference and did all those things. We really called it working in teams. So I think to move into this different phase of education, we've got to be a team, and that can be designed in a lot of different ways. And so, and take advantage of the individual strengths that those teachers have. So we were successful in doing that. We lowered our failure rate in language arts from 15% to 2%. We lowered our failure rate in geometry from 22% to 6%. We started having some of the lowest failure rates in the district, to the point where they were asking us how we were cheating. And the other thing that happened too is we put in place intervention opportunities for kids. We did expanded lunch, but we redesigned our in-school suspension program, where we had kids that they didn't get sent home. You know, they were provided instruction, and they were done in a way where they didn't miss class. So there's a lot of details that go with that, and every situation is a little bit different. But going through that focus on we're going to be about teams. We're going to actually measure our performance relative to those who are performing, and then we're going to build this culture so that folks really do achieve. And we went from number 9 out of 13 in the county to number 1 out of 22. And a lot of those practices have been shared throughout the Southeast. And I've worked with a lot of other school districts, and we had a lot of folks that came and visited and all those kind of things. So I guess it was a success, but I can't really claim all of that by myself. That was a collaborative effort with parents, teachers, students, and so forth. And in fact, the biggest thing that we did in that process was we designed a mentoring program where our best students were mentoring all of our freshman students, and that increased our participation in advanced coursework, increased our leadership opportunities, service contributions that the kids provided. And so the entire culture at this point is almost adult-proof. The students now have it, and they gain it from the early grades because their older brothers and sisters have gone through it. They know what's coming, and it would be tough to go in there and suddenly become a teacher-centered, command and control kind of environment. So now I gave you sort of a snapshot of about a 10-year process. So there probably are some gaps in there. So that may have raised a couple of questions. So I don't know.
Anybody got any follow-up?
Well, there was a second part of this question, but I think you somewhat answered that, but just to kind of
Okay.
follow up and paraphrase this a little bit. So tell me about how you would develop this teamwork among the students, faculty, staff. What are some ways you might do that?
Well, the first thing you do is you start having folks identify their strengths themselves. And then you also have them identify what are the areas you need help in. So it's sort of counterintuitive, but the first step for effective teamwork is really personal self-reflection and an understanding of self-awareness. And so, and that's not a simple process. The second part of that is you study team dynamics. So what are the processes for improvement that require all these different phases of development? You know, a lot of folks, like I'll give you an example. So a lot of folks are really, really good in the ideal end. Creative, and if you've got a team like that and all 4 of the people, like let's say you've got a 4th grade team and all 4 of them are idea people, and they can't wait to see each other. And they are just so excited every time they get together, and they create new ideas, and they've had a blast. Then they go back the next week and they meet again, and they're having a blast again. But at no point in time did that idea time ever transfer to a plan, an operational schedule, a way to execute this, a manner in which to really see if the students improved. So you had too many idea people on that one team. So you've got to have folks that can also do the dot the I's, cross the T's. They get bored in ideal end. They can't wait for that to be done. They kind of say, can you just tell me what to do? I'm ready. Tell me what to do. I'm ready to go do it. And so those people are very, very important too. So we all have all of those phases of a successful implementation, but we're stronger in some of those. So there are assessments where you find out where you are and how you can identify yourself within a team setting. So when you're making a hire, you want to be careful to make sure that you don't ruin a team or take away from a team. I've seen principals who would take a high-performing team, and because it was high-performing, take somebody off of it and put it on another team, thinking that would help it. And all it did was make this one worse, and they missed their teammate, and then the other one, they don't know why that one showed up, and you see what I'm saying. So I think you get back to sort of the science of how effective these teams can work. And so, but, and it can change depending on what it is you're trying to approach. There are some teams you'd love to have on a particular safety project, but you don't want them on your advanced content project. So I think that's, but I've found that most people really enjoy working on a team. They really do. If it's fostered correctly. I don't know if I still answered that question. I got excited about teamwork, and so I'm not sure I answered that. I know it works.
Any other follow-up there? Okay, number 5, I've got that one. Do you believe that extracurricular involvement leads to better academic performance and student motivation? And if so, how would you evaluate extracurricular offerings and fund them?
Yeah, this is correlation and causation. If students are engaged in an activity at school and they like it, they tend to go to school. I'm a big proponent of students being involved. In fact, we opened up an environment where we said, look, if we don't have the right activity for you that doesn't get you excited about coming to school, tell us what we need to do. What club or activity do we need to get started? I think that there's something for everybody, and so you foster that. And it's especially good to foster that if it's revenue neutral. And a lot of times if they're passionate about it enough, they find ways to even raise money for it. And so I think before somebody goes and does something and says, I got to have money to do it, let's see if it's really going to require that. So I think that's in the third level, that's participation. So that might be if funding's available, but that's not going to supersede our instructional program expenditures or our safety expenditures. But one of the things that I think is critically important is that we encourage kids and almost make it an expectation. And that was one of the things we included in our mentoring program too. And we had the older students who were involved students, and they would ask the incoming freshmen, and they'd say, "So what do you want to get involved in?" I mean, it wasn't a question of are you going to get involved? No, it was, so what are you going to get involved in? So the kid, and if a senior is asking a freshman that, the freshman tends to go, well, I don't know. Let me think. And so so we increased our participation rate in activities significantly, and that had a huge bearing on what we were, what we're trying to accomplish.
Is that kind of how you evaluated whether they were worth it?
Participation, the part in terms of we looked at actual participation, but then we also looked at contribution, especially through service. Okay. So we would recognize like graduating classes for the number of service hours. And so we created this culture of what's a new all-time best. So this year the senior class contributed 10,000 hours of service to the community. So that set a benchmark then for the next senior class. And so that creates that, culture where, okay, for Relay for Life or for whatever activity it may be, and then did the school all get behind it. So that was one of our ways to measure participation. The other thing to measure participation was actual participation. So what percentage of our students were actually involved in extracurricular activities? So we went from about 65% to 87% in 2 years. So that's at a high school where there's 3,000 kids. We found things for the bulk of those kids to get involved in. We had several different clubs that were even started. We had a ping pong club started. They held a tournament. They had all kind of, they actually had a seeding exhibition to see who was going to be the best ping pong players, I have nothing against ping pong. I thought it was great, and these kids, they really loved it. The key, we had a few guidelines, obviously. You have to have an adult sponsor. And so, but typically they could find somebody that was willing to sponsor the kids and stuff. And so it was neat to see those things happen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mike, you're up next, number 6.
All right. As superintendent, how would you measure the progress or success of our school system from year to year, and how would you share this information?
Yeah, I think the starting point is what are the things that you want to be measured on? And then how are those things measured? And then the people that you or the schools that you're benchmarking against, how are they doing? So, as I look at different things in terms of Jacksonville City Schools is a high-performing school district, okay? But is it as high as you want it to be in all areas? And so I just took one data point and looked at it. And I think, take 8th grade math scores. So if you look at 8th grade math scores and you look at the percent exceeds, and you look at the percent that didn't meet, and you look at the percent that met, and you look at the percent that barely met, and then you compare that against 4 districts that you want to compare yourself to. And you do it for your own benefit. That's one of the things that you don't do in terms of show it to everybody, even because everybody could find it if they want to. I found it, so I think everybody could find it if they wanted to. Now, when you reorganize that data, though, in terms of relative comparison, it gives you somebody to shoot for. Okay, so, and ask this very important question. What are they doing? When I first became a principal of a high school, I didn't ask what were the best schools in our district doing. I asked, what's the best high school in America doing? And I found it. It wasn't hard to figure it out, and that's how I kind of got in line with the PLC stuff, because the highest performing high school in America at that time was Adlai Stevenson High School in Lincolnshire, Illinois. And so they had won the Blue Ribbon Award 4 times, the only school that had done it at that time. And so I asked a real simple question. I said, so what are they doing? And the guy that was the principal was Rick DeFore, who was then their superintendent. So I started talking to Rick. So I called him up. I said, what are you doing? He didn't know Georgia existed. I mean, he really didn't. I mean, it was an interesting discussion. So then we started working on what they were doing. And so we didn't try to invent stuff. We just copied them. And what was fun, though, was when we passed them in terms of percentage of our high school seniors who actually had passed an AP exam. That was fun when that day happened. So, I'm not saying they're looking at, they're not looking at us, but because they've already done real well. So I think you look at what it is you want to measure, then how are you going to communicate that? Then you say, okay, relative comparison. And you can do that with a classroom level, school level, whichever level you want that to be. I think most schools do a really, really good job with your high achievers. They really do. So if that's what we're looking at, we're probably going to fare pretty well. But we've got to look at kind of what we're doing in terms of gap closure, what we're doing in terms of, opportunities for kids that don't typically take an advanced course. Are they doing a joint enrollment course? What course are they taking that they're going to challenge themselves? I'll tell you, I put the most inspirational day I had with the staff while I was a principal was when I read a letter from a parent of a special ed student who had taken and passed AP U.S. History. And the letter was sent to the staff and said, you believed in our child more than we believed in her. And she teaches now. Oh my gosh, there was crying going on like you wouldn't believe. So the belief in what a student can do, I think, is limitless. I really do. I think that people really get a sense of accomplishment and courage and confidence when they achieve something that they were not expected to do. And these schools exist. So I always tell researchers, don't tell me about poverty. Don't tell me about educational background. Tell me about what the school did that wasn't supposed to succeed. What did they do to get them to succeed? And number one, the number one factor, connection with a teacher. Number one. So are we measuring that? Because I contend if we measure the connectivity that we have, and we measure the ability to assess where students are, and we measure the level at which we allow students to go beyond the standard, that's what makes the difference. That's the difference in good and great.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any follow-up there? I had one follow-up. You mentioned AP. I noticed in your packet that you had a pretty substantial growth at North Gwinnett. when you were there? Could you speak to that a little bit? Was it related to what we're talking about now?
Yeah, when I first began my tenure there, we had 31 students who were involved in the advanced placement program out of 1,800. We ranked last. I'll never forget it. My first day, we had a meeting and the superintendent had College Board data up on the board, and he said, "You know the thing I like about College Board, they know our data better than we do." And then I saw our school and I saw that chart and I said, "Wow, how did that happen? Or why is that happening?" And then let's see what we're going to do. And so the key there was access, number one. And the second part was expectations for those kids to take at least one AP class. And we started monitoring that. And then the third part of that was, how did we do? Did we rank? And at the same time, Jay Matthews started his process in terms of ranking the most challenging schools in America. And so we brought some of that same concept to James Clemens and Madison City. And so I'm not, the worst thing about AP is AP. So the reality is that just happened to be our vehicle to take kids and put them in advanced coursework. I mean, when you've got kids doing dual enrollment and you've got kids that are taking advanced courses, that's one of our data points. Whether anybody else measures that or not, to me, that's as important as, we've got kids that ought to be involved in AP, but we've got kids that should stretch themselves and be in advanced coursework and being in dual enrollment and being, all of those things count. So it's really about putting the child in a challenging situation. Most kids, if you ask them after they get out of high school, what do you wish you'd done? Because we used to ask them, what do you wish you'd done differently? I wished I'd taken harder classes. That's from the kids. I wished I'd taken harder classes. I mean, I think that's something we ought to, we're going to be able to compete if we prepare ourselves, by challenging ourselves.
One other follow-up, when you have the results and how do you share that with the stakeholders in the community, or how have you done that?
Yes, we were in a system where we call it results-based evaluation system, and then with that was an accountability report. So putting an accountability report together that's a public document and sharing not just the hard data, and the student, achievement data, but some of the softer data, the service hours, the programs, the initiatives, the extracurriculars, and all those things, the community components. So everybody had a 1-2 page, understanding of what we were all about, and then could see that over time. So we looked at, okay, what's our 1 year, information, but then what's our, longitudinal information look like as well. So at that level, that was sort of for the community. From an internal level, though, and this was something we started doing, in Jackson County, so we improved our process because each month was the board level improvement for the district. That launched the weekly development and improvement at the school, which supported the daily improvement in the classroom and the hourly improvement for the student. That's about as good as you can get. Anything faster than that, you don't have time to digest. But that's 12 times faster than or 9 times faster than what most folks go. Most folks go at a yearly on the system level. So we move that to a monthly. And then once that's deliberately put in place in a communication aspect, people begin to expect it. The school team takes it, the classroom team takes it, and then the students even understand too. And I didn't make this one up. The most fascinating visit I think I ever made in a school visit, there's a lady named Muriel Summers, and Muriel did this whole thing with the Covey stuff and all that, and the Leader in Me schools, and there's a lot of those schools around and stuff across the country. We went to see her school over in North Carolina, and she had this leadership school, and the leadership was important, but it wasn't the thing. What was the thing was the student-based performance communication. So they had kindergarten kids talking about their achievement levels, and they had to present their own parent conferences. I was blown away. I mean, that shocked me a little bit. And so I went back and I thought, well, shoot, if I can do it in North Carolina, we can do it over here too. So we began to involve our students in that part too. So when they start owning their own, communication of achievement, that's a big step. So, and that may already be in place here, and I apologize if that's already in place. That's awesome. But if it's not, I'd just love to get a chance to work with that part too. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Kelly, you're up, number 7.
What is your approach to discipline, and how would you ensure that students have a safe, secure, and orderly environment for learning and for participating in extracurricular activities?
Yeah, I think discipline is one of those things that's owned by everybody. I remember sharing with the administrative team one time, and this is, at a school where there's 3,000 kids, and I said, folks, they represent 89% of the folks that are in this building. If the 3,000 of them ever decided to do something, what are we going to do? I said, so it would be a really good idea to probably include them. And so it's amazing to me when the kids feel like they have an ownership and responsibility for school discipline. And the community feels like they have an ownership and responsibility for school discipline. And if they see something that's not right, and they've been encouraged to tell you that. And folks have all these electronic things and hotlines and all that kind of stuff, even, if it's anonymous or whatever. And you make that sort of the forefront of your discipline approach. Do we have a culture of collaboration and response and prevention of inappropriate behavior? So that's where we start. Then I think we respond appropriately and not use policy to kick people out. Simplify policy so we don't limit judgment. We have a lot of educated people who are working with behavior of students, and so sometimes they do stupid things. So we don't want to policy ourselves where we eliminate our judgment to take each situation for what it is. So I think that's another thing. We worked really hard to get our policies that provided opportunities for judgment at the school and classroom level. Now, the other thing we did is this goes back to prioritization and what you value most. Not only from a money standpoint, but from a practice standpoint in support of instruction. For example, we termed instructional time to be the most important thing that we were in protection of. We protected instructional time like our life depended on it. And we all had emergency call buttons in our rooms. And so what I shared with the folks, I said, okay, look, we want a teacher to feel as though if they push that button because somebody's disrupting the classroom, you respond. Not some paper trail process. You treat protection of instructional time like your life depended on it. Now, it's amazing how fast this changes the culture of your school if you're really focused about instruction. And this doesn't mean that every kid is going to be a problem, but if the teacher knows, okay, I know they got my back, I know this, and they push that button, and within 20 seconds, an administrator or a support person or a respondee, somebody shows up. And we had several different teams. We several different people that were on that team that did that. And then they'd just ask a simple question. What's going on? And oftentimes it was one of those things where I've asked so-and-so, I've asked little Johnny here to behave himself, and he just cannot control himself today. And then you ask a follow-up question. Is he normally like this? No. Then you bring him out and you talk to him and you say, okay, what's going on? And he starts crying. My mom was mad at me this morning. I'm sorry, I didn't, and then you start talking to him some more. But you haven't disrupted instruction. You remove the disruption. And if it warrants further action, you're able to make an administrative decision about it. But what I found was happening is we had procedurally put ourselves into this response to a discipline that by the time the kid actually got to talk to somebody, you forgot what they did. So that was one of the things we did in response. The other thing we did, like I talked earlier about the in-school suspension thing. And we had folks that would come and watch this. So we felt like we had this lunch period, which was a full period. And so if kids didn't do what they were supposed to, they'd lose their lunch. Now, we fed them. We didn't let them, make them go without food. But what they did is they had to go 5 days of this restricted lunch instead of 1 day of in-school suspension. Because for us, in-school suspension was kind of weird. Because we're putting a kid in there that didn't really want to be in class anyway, and then we're sending a paper to teachers to give them work that they're going to miss out of their class because we put them in this room with somebody who doesn't know how to teach this. So we began to say, why, going back to that decision process, why are we doing this, and is this student-centered? Or is this administrative bureaucracy? Now, I'm not trying to step on any toes here. Don't misunderstand it. I'm just saying how we approach discipline, though, is extremely important in terms of how we're supporting our instructional program. It all should fit. So when we started putting these things together, our referrals went way, 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 way down. Our attendance went way, way, way up. Our performance went, all those things happened that you want to see happen, because you had the right approach. And we'd have people come visit, and they'd leave, and they'd say, I'll tell you what, we may not be able to do all this stuff, but we're going to do that tomorrow. I love that restricted lunch thing. And they're still doing it, so, years later. That got more specific than the overall question, but I did that intentionally because I just wanted to share an example of that type of thinking. Please don't misunderstand that would be the way to do something. I wouldn't say, or I wouldn't make that statement, because every school context is different. So I'm not a program guy. I'm not a guy that comes in and says, here's the program we're going to do. There's too many things we have to look at first. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Any other follow-up? Okay. I've got number 8. Would you recommend implementing a program that you strongly feel would benefit students, even if funding the program would require dipping into local fund reserves?
Not out of the process. Not unless we just got some earth-shattering type of research that everybody agreed with that said this is the best thing since sliced bread and you better jump on board. And then everybody agreed on. Because it's getting outside of our process of what are our priorities, what are the things that we're going to spend our monies on, what are things that are revenue neutral, what are things that are revenue dependent. And so what we would do, if it's so great, then it's going to be great 6 months from now too. So we'd enter it into the next process of our budget development as a consideration. And does it move itself? If it's such a great program, is it going to move itself into that instruction level where we're going to, and if it does, then what are we going to take out? Oftentimes in that process, we find things that we take out because they're not as effective as they once were. So that's all part of that process too.
Okay, there's a second part. What level of reserve funds do you think a system should seek to maintain as a floor?
Well, as the state requires a month, but I think 3 to 6 months is really, I think that's prudent. And then I also think sometimes if you're building for, a serious project like the construction of a new school, you can even look longer. Like do we have a 12-month? Do we have, because if you're in a span where it's going to take 12 months to construct a facility, then you probably want to have that level of reserves or move to that if possible. And if you go too far beyond that, then it becomes, well, we must not need any taxation. We must not need, they got more money than they can even use. And so that's really not ever the case, but I think you want a healthy reserve, but you don't want to be your focus on building this beyond, then it doesn't make sense. Then you're cutting programs that really would be helping the kids.
Any follow-up to that? Did you see a significant difference between Georgia schools and Alabama schools?
In terms of fun,
With the ability to have a 3 to 6 month reserve, or they're kind of similar with their ability to get there?
They're similar, yeah, they're very similar. I mean, the way the monies are produced and stuff, I mean, is very similar. I think, there may be a little more volatility even, with Alabama funding than Georgia from what, I mean, that's, because it's the, that dependency on the state budget. The funding formula in Georgia is a little bit more concrete. So that's been my experience in the research that I've seen so far.
Okay. Number 9, Miss Emily.
How would you evaluate the effectiveness of teachers and administrators, and describe an experience you've had with an ineffective teacher administrator, and how did you resolve that?
Yeah, I think some of this goes back to, prioritizing what really does make a difference. And so measuring that connectivity, measuring formative processes, measuring the level at which student voice is being captured within the classroom setting, and then helping teachers know and understand how well they're doing. I contend that you can help teachers more if you go in their classroom less and you talk to them more. So if you've designated 20 minutes for an observation, if you spend 5 minutes in the classroom, you can pretty much measure some of those components if you spend 15 minutes having a one-on-one conversation with the teacher. I'm not a checklist person, so if I go in, and you can make any system kind of work. If we got to fill out checklists, we can do that, but we're going to make sure we have that conversation. So evaluating effectiveness is really through that one-on-one connected conversation about performance. Sharing with the observer from the teacher perspective real examples, real, cited evidence, and how that weighs into their team expectations too. How's our team doing? So we do it on a team base, an individual base, and then a school base. And so that's how we're measuring effectiveness. We also do that in terms of relative performance to the folks that we want to benchmark ourselves. The other thing is letting the teachers own as much of the assessment process as possible. Recognizing that we've got external, factors that we have to be part of. But once the teachers understand, and they really do understand, what those standards of performance are, they're going to find the best ways to figure that out, and then let them have a chance to talk about it. I think in terms of effectiveness, so I can give you examples of teacher effectiveness or principal effectiveness or both, or which would do you want both or?
You have both?
Sure. All right, let me give you an example of a teacher performance effectiveness issue first, because it's not always, I shouldn't say often. Most of our responses to lack of teacher performance is more training. Well, what if it's not a training issue? What if they know everything there is to know about that content? I worked with a calculus teacher one time. Man, she knew her stuff. She totally knew her stuff. But the issue wasn't knowing her stuff. The issue was connection with the kids. The kids thought she was mad at them. Because we asked them, how's it going? It's going great, but I don't think my calculus teacher likes me. So I went into her class, and I just went in there to look for that one thing. Do the kids like her? Does she like them? She didn't know I was there. I didn't think she liked me, and I didn't even know, you know what I'm saying? I mean, so now in her mind, she had no idea that was happening. She had no idea that was happening. So how do we approach that? We had to have a very serious conversation. We had to confront the perception issue. We had to confront what she thought was happening and what the students were actually experiencing. And we did that. So I didn't do that by myself. I had another person there, and we talked to her. And we praised her for her knowledge. We praised her for her preparation. We praised her for her being a good teammate. But then we said, here's what's keeping these kids from being as successful as they can. They don't think you like them. She cried so much, I couldn't help her, okay? Had to let her stay home a day or two, okay? Then she came back and she said, so how do I get better at this? So we started working on this. So the growth that took place for her was incredible. But if we don't have that conversation based on the reality, then that's not going to happen. We could have sent her to all kind of training, and that wouldn't, you know what I'm saying? So I think it's the ability to have your process where you truly have conversations about what you're trying to address. If your structure doesn't allow for that, then there's a problem. And so I think that you've got to have folks that then are trained to pick up on things, that are trained to have the right kind of conversation, that are able to support folks in their efforts to grow. And it made a significant impact. Okay, so let's go to the principal level, all right? Having had a chance to work with a lot of them, okay, in different contexts, different levels, and so forth, the biggest mistake that I see for principals being successful and being effective is that they go into that principal job and they're an assistant principal on steroids. They're the only one doing any work. I mean, and because as an assistant principal, their job has been to support the success of the teachers. And they were great at it. That's why they got to be a principal. And then they go into that role, and it's like a whole different thing. So in working with, I had a brand new first-year principal, and so the first thing I talked to her about, I said, so she'd made her checklist. She had all her things ready to do, all the things to get school open. And I said, so how are you feeling? And she said, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm feeling really comfortable. See, here's what I've done. And I said, is that work that an assistant principal would do or that you should do? And then she looked at me and she said, this is kind of what I've always done. I said, bingo. I said, have you met with the president of your PTA this week? Have you talked to the grade chair for fourth grade performance? Have you formed your advisory committee yet of all various stakeholders so you can get your improvement plan in process? These are a little more CEO-ish like. Now, you don't let them do that. You know, now she was a great success story. Okay. Now there have been some that they really, really needed to be an assistant principal. They were best in that job. Okay. And the same thing, so if principal moves to superintendent, that's a whole different job too. So that's a whole different job. That's a job making sure that you're actually invested in the community as much as you are the schools. Because you're the person who's actually able to be accountable for that. Anybody in the community should be able to talk to the superintendent. And you should be able to tell them what's going on as much as possible. And you should be able to share the vision and represent the board and do that. So here's the key to this. I've shared sort of the specific. It goes back to this. Every single role in the school district has a role, has a responsibility, and has expectations. What are our roles, responsibilities, and expectations in every facet of what we do? And does it come back to the students? Because we've got two things. We've got folks that are directly involved with students, and we've got folks that are supporting those who are directly involved with students. And if you're not in one of those two, there's probably not a role for you.
Any follow-up? Okay,
Mr. Glass, are we doing okay on
I think we are.
time so far?
Lisa?
All right. Okay.
I think we're doing fine.
All right. I just want to make sure because I can get going.
You're doing
I
fine.
can
You're
go
doing
on.
fine. You just be yourself.
All
You're doing great. Number 10, Mr. Steve.
Describe your management style and what methods you have found to be the most effective in supervision and building rapport with administrators and employees.
Yeah, I like folks. I really do like people. And I really do try to see the best in people. And I think everybody gets up each and every day trying to do the very best job they can. And even if it's not, that's where we start. And so from a management standpoint, I think that you manage processes and you lead people. So people don't want to be managed. And so I try to take that into consideration. And even when you have a difficult conversation, I think it's really important to respect that person's dignity. I think it's important to talk to the person about their growth and progress and celebrate that. And I think it's important to have that critical conversation when there needs to be some improvement made. And I think it's important to share with them what might happen if some of that improvement doesn't take place. And it's not, if it's hurting kids, then we've got to sort of address it. We can't just leave it unaddressed. So I guess from a management style, I'm always looking at how do we better improve this process? How do we better improve this structure? Is this a design issue or is this a people issue? And so those are key questions that we sort of enter into as we start to work in the best way to manage efficiently and effectively. But I often say too, don't compromise effectiveness for efficiency. So that's a key part in terms of appropriate management. And you can't do that unless you kind of know the context at which you're working and the person that's involved or the persons that are involved. And there are blind spots. This is no exact science. There are blind spots. So I'm always wary of that too, and I ask that question. What are the blind spots? What are the things, a scary thing is when you get a group of really excited folks and they go launch something and they didn't think about the blind spots. And then they do it and they go, uh-oh. It's hard, so it's really hard to pull that one back.
Any follow-up? Okay. Mike, number 11.
Right, in a hypothetical classroom where a concept has been taught and 1/3 of the students have not grasped the concept, 1/3 of the students have partially grasped the concept, and 1/3 of the students have mastered the concept, what are your expectations about how to manage the pace of teaching and learning in this classroom?
Yeah. This is within a much larger context. So at any point in time, in any classroom, in any school, that scenario may exist, or worse. So prior question then would be, what are our delivery structures in terms of the content? What are our intervention processes when students do not learn effectively? What are we doing to personalize and individualize whether they're achieving at a high level or not? Because it's different for those different scenarios. And so I go back to a question that was asked to me about 15 years ago. It was really, really, really powerful. And this had to do with whether or not the school culture was student-centered or not. And the question was this: imagine the day of your A student. Imagine that student's day or class experience. Imagine now, in contrast, the day of your D student. So imagine that student's day. If those two students, your A student and your D student, started the day the same way, went to classes the same way, attended lunch the same way, got on the bus at the end of the day the same way, then that's not student-centered. That's teach and test and hope for the best. So there's a broader structure that's in place that makes sure that the A student is maximizing his or her experience at the same time that the D student is making the most to improve. And those days start to look different. Because now you're focused on the development of the student and not the necessary structures that may be in place for the teachers. That's a hard pill to swallow, to be honest. Because we've been doing a lot of teaching and testing and hoping for the best for a long time. We're in a different world now. And if people know that they've got folks with them to work on that, what I would also share with that in terms of that concept okay? You know you've really kind of gotten where you need to be if the entire school district, okay, is truly focused on the success of each individual child. And you can identify and point out the evidence that makes that so. And you're communicating that effectively. In other words, you've done all you can so no one falls through the cracks. And you've done all you can to maximize each person's experience. So
So,
that was a great question.
so once you set your expectations in those areas as superintendent, how would you ensure that those expectations are met in the classroom?
I'm going to ask them, what are they doing? And what are you doing? I mean, if I go by and I see that and I see that folks aren't working together, I see that kids aren't being engaged, I see that kids are being treated as though there's one of a large group, then I'm going to ask, how are we going to make this different? And then I'm going to say, okay, and then to back that up, I may say, so let's decide, okay, we want to be top 5 or whatever, top 1 or top whatever, and we want to be the very best school district of less than 2,000 kids in the state of Alabama and in the Southeast. So who are the best performing school districts that are in that category? And what's their data show us? And then I ask the folks, and I say, okay, who should we be outperforming? Should we be outperforming this school district? Should we be outperforming? Now this is internal. This is for us. We may talk about it in a work session, but that's not part of our accountability report, okay? Our accountability report's about us. Our improvement process is our relative comparison to other folks. We get a pretty good sense then if we're making progress or not, okay? And folks then, and they may have a perception. They may think, oh, we're outperforming so-and-so, I just know we are. But then they look at the data and it doesn't really support that. So, and I've been in situations where that was the case. And they didn't believe it when I shared data where we actually were outperforming. Folks, we're number 1 in this category. I don't believe that. I literally had that happen. I said, we've never outperformed them before. And I said, okay, you look at the stage, you tell me. So I think the perception part's part of it too. But that whole structure of who we benchmark against, how are we going to intervene, how are we going to advance, all those things, those are all things that we have to develop together. That's not something, I'm not a guy, I'm not going to give you but those are good conversations. So I'm going to be the one that's going to be asking those kinds of questions, and other folks start asking those questions too. And then they know the questions I'm going to ask, because they're pretty simple questions. They're hard answers, but they're simple questions. I'm not trying to evade this, but at the same time, if what I think is the case with this school district and where you want to go, then that's the kind of answer that I think is probably most appropriate.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's move on to number 12. Emily?
As the face of the school system, a superintendent is charged with working collaboratively with faculty and staff, students, parents, community members, and business leaders alike in various capacities. Describe a situation where you've worked with people who had strong differences of opinion. How do you handle this situation?
Yeah, visibility is huge, and getting your message right is really, really important. And also, I think those two things are really important. I think it's exceptionally important to be authentic, and so you're not, I'm going to be the same guy if I'm going to a Rotary Club as I am going to a school cafeteria or meeting with, a parent and her child. So in terms of who I am, there's not going to be a mystery about that. So I think that's pretty important. I also think it's recognition of what the perception and beliefs are, and strong feelings. So, I mentioned earlier when we first started, my experience in Madison. Okay, so Madison is a great school district. It really is. And Bob Jones High School is a great high school. okay? And so when I show up, and we're gonna open a brand new one, and we're building it, and it's just bricks and mortar at the time, and it's not even close to being completed, but we've got about 10 months to get it ready to open, because the kids are coming. Well, the perception was that, one, no kids would wanna go. Two, no staff would wanna go. Why would anybody ever wanna leave this awesome school that's already there? And folks were telling me that they felt sorry for me. Now, I didn't make these up, and I didn't have them, they were there a lot longer before I got there, if that makes sense. So how do you address that? Well, you start thinking about the things you got to do. We've got to create a vision for a new school community. The concept of school community wasn't something they'd ever really thought about because they didn't have to. So how do we do that? Okay? Then we start talking about how do we have a K-12 vision? Because they hadn't had to do that either. And then we start thinking about how are we going to create a student-centered culture for this school community and attract the kind of folks that want to be a part of that. So in a relatively short period of time, we started getting some folks excited about it. You know, we identified some successful students who were coming, and they became a leadership group. And they were the first group to get to tour the school before it was really open to tour. So guess what happens when kids get to go see what they're going to get to go be part of? They start talking to their friends, who talking to their parents. And then we hired a couple of people from Bob Jones who were awesome. And all of a sudden, the belief started to be shattered with data and evidence. Then people make up stuff. You know how that works. So it's not based on the good process and working with folks and let's get through this. No, it had to be some sinister thing. There was no sinister thing going on. It was just crafting that vision appropriately, communicating effectively, getting folks excited, and all of a sudden things started taking off. And they did. And they still do. And they had I loved my experience there because there's so many great people there. And they're still there. And a lot of those folks, the team we put together, all of them been promoted into different various areas too. Now they're at the district level or they're principals in other schools and stuff like that. So that's what starts to happen too. So your folks that have significant performance, they start getting picked up. People start finding them. So you got to have some more folks ready to come in. You know, stability is good and change is good. They're both good.
So I asked the second part of that question. From that experience you just provided, would you have done anything differently?
Always would have done something different. You know, my dad was a platoon sergeant, so at 5 years old, we were doing AARs, that's after action review. So there wasn't a thing that we did in the house that we didn't sit down the very next moment or the next day, and he sat us all down and said, what went well? What didn't go well? What can we do better the next time? How well can you clean this room? Get those clothes on. So yes, there's always something you can do better. And so what I would have done differently, because I didn't recognize these beliefs and perceptions. I didn't know those. So I would have asked. In other words, I didn't find some of that stuff out until we started getting into some of the processes and putting those to work. One, we didn't have a whole lot of time, but to start with, I would have taken another day or two and just talked about and asked about and listened. What do you guys think? How's this going to go? What should we do to make this work? You've been here a lot longer than us. I would have spent more time doing that. Because I didn't realize how entrenched some of those beliefs were. And so because I didn't know that, when some of those things started happening, man, it hurt some feelings. There was personal attachment. There was, oh my gosh, so-and-so left. Oh my gosh, so-and-so left. We're all in the same place. You know, but there was some separation things that we could have avoided because we could have actually kind of talked through them. So I would have done that differently. Now, in terms of in terms of the structure, the expectations, the design, the layout, and all those things, the identification of some of the key staff members, all of that, I wouldn't have changed one thing about that. So,
Okay. I had one follow-up. In your packet there, you mentioned that you were part of a founders group in Madison. Is that like a community,
yeah, like a
Okay.
school community, that was a school community foundation group.
Okay.
So that was to help support the academic programs of the school. And John Rankin was the guy where the property came from, where the school was built. And so he was we designated him as sort of the founder of the location and got him involved, and then we started getting some other folks involved. And so that was a neat thing. And I don't know where that is today, but that got some community input, in some ways that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
okay? Number 13 is mine. As school board members, we're charged with making sure of three things. There's a clear vision for the system, resources are allocated to achieve the vision, there's accountability where it's clear if goals are achieved. How would you address vision, resources, and accountability in a system that has high standards, high expectations, and high achievers? And how would you respond to a system that expects top 5 results? You may have
Yeah.
touched on some of these things.
Yeah, and I guess first and foremost, what is our communication strategy for that? And are we effectively communicating with each other? And do we model the level of teamwork and expectations that we expect for all employees within the district? And so I think the board superintendent team is one that has to be looked to show how that's supposed to work. And so I think that we'd spend some time trying to make sure we're all on the same page with that. And then the key part too is, so, as a superintendent, working and understanding each one of you individually, but at the same time, how well are we working collectively? I think that's, so it's a management of those paired relationships. There's 10 of them, just with you. So at any given point in time, there's 10 relationships that I got to make sure is okay. So within this board, there's 2 of you that are, and each one of you have a different perspective. If you were to list the 10 relationships on the board, how would you rank them? And are we addressing the one that's not so good? And if we got all 10 of those that are awesome, then we got to think about the one with me. And if it's not awesome, then we got to keep working and stuff, or at least I feel like I do. So I think managing those paired relationships is huge. I think how we then communicate with each other and then transfer that to our rest of our stakeholders. Do we communicate effectively in terms of our goal attainment, our vision, and so forth, to our students, to our teachers, to our parents, to our staff, and to our community. And, lots of different ways of doing that. But we'd all feel good about it, So I would look forward to that kind of work anyway. What is our accountability process? What is our communication process? What does that actually look like?
Any follow-up? Okay. Kelly, number 14.
With funding tight, teachers, administrators, and support staff have taken on more and more responsibilities. What would you do to keep them encouraged and their morale up?
Yeah, it'd have to be a lot of different things, because people are inspired by different things, At the very least, though, anybody's direct supervisor has an immediate bearing on that person's morale. So whether it's the grade level chair or the principal or the superintendent or whomever, are you recognizing teamwork, and are you recognizing performance? And are you recognizing effort? You know, I heard somebody say one time, there's plenty of room at the end of the extra mile. Well, we want that place to be crowded. Because when it's crowded, boy, folks are happy. Everybody around them is going the extra mile, and they enjoy doing it because it's their passion. And they love the folks that they're doing that with. I mean, that's when it's really fun. That's when it's really fun. And folks, if you when you walk in a room and that's taking place, you can feel that right away. And then we see it at the student level too. It's kind of cool too. I mean, so I think that that's part of that, and then, saying thank you. And we used to do different things too in terms of, I used to challenge principals, I'd say, because everybody get caught in this evaluation process and of observations and all this kind of stuff. And I told them, I said, okay, it's August. Who was your top performer last year in terms of student performance? Do their evaluation soon. Go ahead and get that one done. Don't save it to the end. Because if you save that one to the end and you do it the last week of May, you've let your very best performer feel all year that they weren't appreciated just because you took it for granted. I said, now here's what I want you to do and consider. When you do that evaluation and you do it in the fall and you do it early on and you already know they're rocking again, then sit back and do this. Ask them one really important question. How'd you do it? How are you able to make, and watch them and listen to them, because they're just about ready to give you the school improvement plan for next year. So that's another, so it's important to think about what you want to gain. Is every process you have, does it give you the opportunity to say good job? Do we do that in our board meetings? Do we recognize student achievement, student performance? Do we, I'm sure we do, but are we strategic about it, but also human about it? So we need both.
All right, second part. Regarding teacher recruitment, what is your definition of a highly effective teacher, and how would you recruit teachers that fit this description to our system?
Highly effective teachers are able to take students and increase their performance beyond what they were supposed to. So in other words, if we look at the correlation data based on whatever measure we want to use, but the teacher didn't buy that. Like that special ed kid I was telling you about that passed an AP US History. I mean, there was a teacher that decided that kid would be successful. So that's a highly effective teacher. So that's one component. The other component is they work well with their teammates. They're a good team member. They're not just about their own personal achievements. They're really about the school district and the school. Our school district, our school, our community. And they really are part of our. So I think that is a highly effective teacher, which tends to make for a very highly effective school district.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any follow-up on that?
How would you recruit those teachers to our district?
Well, recruitment is a broad process. So we recruit by who we are. We're going to attract who we are first. Second, we want to make sure that when we get ourselves in a recruitment process, let's say we're recruiting at Jack State. I mean, we have a lot of staff from Jack State. So I would want the best teachers at Jack State to want to come to Jacksonville City Schools. So I'd want to know who those folks are, and we probably could at least have somebody's perception about it. And then we'd like to make sure that we're taking advantage of when those student teachers come here and we get to witness, them in action. If we go to these various places that produce great teachers, we want to make sure we stand out, that we've got evidence that's going to attract the best. Went to a teacher recruitment fair one time, and so we had our table all set up, and we had a guy that came in. He was relocating from Miami, and he's been teaching at Coral Gables, which is one of the highest performing AP schools in the country, okay? And so when he showed up, and he knew who we were, and I knew who he was. I mean, I didn't know him, but I knew the school he was coming from. And so I told the staff with us, I said, and there's 130 schools represented, and I said, okay, there are probably 10 that are the must-haves. Those are level 5s, and we're done on a 5-level scale. I said, so you want to make an impression that this is where you want to be. I mean, it's like what the SEC does in recruiting players. You know, Alabama does a real good job of that, you know, and the others are trying, you know, but at the end of the day, they got good players, a lot of them. And so why? Because they do a really, really good job recruiting. So recruiting, you're recruiting every single day. You're recruiting good folks every single day. And then what I've found too is being smart, okay, is one thing. Hardworking is another. And those are the prerequisites. The third thing is the most important. They feel fortunate to be here. Because if they're smart and they're hardworking, but they don't feel fortunate to be here, they're not going to be a good teammate. So that third thing's a little tougher to figure out. So in recruiting, make sure they're smart, make sure they're hardworking, but have enough conversation to know they feel fortunate to be here.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can I come back to that too, one more, and just real quick too? And so in hiring, so kind of have a little rule of thumb. Any position, best inside, best outside, and a wild card. So when you narrow it down to that, then pick the best fit. That's just a general rule. It doesn't always work that way, because sometimes you've got a job that's so difficult you don't have that number of candidates. But most often, if you've allowed the process to work and you've thought about what you need, you've already got that ready to go. Sorry, Mr. Glass.
That's okay. All right, Steve, number 15.
Describe a school wellness program and what you know about implementing one.
Yeah, this question threw me. So I think I'm missing something on this. So is a school wellness something that, I mean, do we have that? Is there a wellness initiative in the state of Alabama? Is there?
It's federal. It's part of that WIC reauthorization thing.
Oh. Oh.
For
Okay. Yeah. We need to be well. And so we'll, we want to.
it's a law. You have at least the minimum. You have a wellness committee of stakeholders.
Okay.
So,
All right, let's do that.
At least an annual.
Yeah, let's do that. I mean, are you well? Do we have a wellness? I mean, I'm not trying to be flippant on this. That one just threw me. It threw me, and so I would do a little more research and get whatever wellness situation we needed taken care of. In fact, we'd exceed it. We're going to be physically well. We're going to be mentally well. We're going to be team-based well and performance well, and as wellness is, and we're going to share that with everybody we can. I'm sorry.
Well,
I mean, and I know it's important too. I mean, that's what we're about. I felt like, okay, well, yeah, we're about wellness. We're about wellness of these young people every single second of the day. So being in a school means you're a part of a wellness program. Does it? I mean, I'm sorry. Is it
Do you, in schools that you've led?
that I've worked with and
Yeah.
led?
Yeah, did you have, for example, a recess? Was the recess during school at the schools where you?
Yeah. Yeah. Are we not supposed to do that?
Yes, I didn't say
Yeah.
we weren't.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we wanted to have some outdoor activity. We definitely wanted that.
Well, schools have been identified as, one of the 5 places you can impact, like childhood obesity, or, like there's vitamin D deficiencies just because kids aren't getting sunshine. I mean, it's a public health and quality of life issue for students, so that's why I was asking.
I'm all for it. You have my 100% complete support of the wellness program for our students, staff, and anybody else that wants to participate too. But I think it's very, very important. I'm not trying to. I really do think it's important. I just really didn't understand it. I do now. I understand it, and I'm in total support of it. And I think that folks should have that incorporated.
Is there any follow-up to that?
I hope not.
You could tell us about the benefits of unstructured and structured play, you know, for children.
All right, yes, sir.
I mean, you probably took early childhood development.
I did. I
in
took all
probably
those
your
things.
BS.
I know a little bit about all that, and
Yeah.
so you know, and so I felt like, I mean, you know, you want your kids to be fed, you want them to have rest, you want them to have exercise, you want them, you know, you want them to have all of those things, and you want to make sure there's a time for that to take place. And so, probably the best wellness experience that I've witnessed, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, was the online health class, where the kids had to wear these monitors and document their activity and actually do these things that gave them a computer printout of their success in terms of their wellness. So I've seen this wellness develop within the health and PE curriculums. I've seen it developed within, you know, the activity, whether that's supervised or unsupervised, and, you know, and addressed also in terms of kids that weren't well, an entire support system for those kids. So in the broad scope of wellness, you know, we're always attending to their physical, their mental, their intellectual, and their behavioral wellness. So wellness is a constant in all of our efforts that we actually put forth.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate having a chance to answer the question once I understood it. You're a good teacher.
Well, you're welcome.
You know, just as a little bit of a follow-up to that, there is so much push for a kid's time. And sometimes I feel like we're rushing our kids through life. And we talked about this some, where you feel like they never have a chance to be a kid, you know. And I think that you're kind of touching on that topic a little bit with the wellness topic. You know, we're pushing so hard to be
Yeah.
academically successful and advanced, and the kids never have a chance to be kids.
Well, and it's, you know, it's one of the things, and you know, we talked a little bit about some of the technology integration and some of those expectations in terms of the design of James Clemens and so forth, and other schools too. But one of the things that we face now is, so when do you power down? So when do you turn the phone off? So when do you have a one-on-one connected conversation without distraction? So there's an element of wellness that goes with that, is, you know, also. And we didn't have to worry about that before, but we actually do now. You know, there's enough data to show we've got students now that are teenagers that aren't as empathetic as they once were. They're colder than they, you know, they don't understand the humanity at the level that they should. So that goes back to that teacher-student connectivity that is so, so, so important that we have as a not just an expectation, but that is something that we foster and develop, you know. So it's important.
Thank you. All right, Mike, number 16.
Yes, as you're aware, we do not have a middle school, which means 7th and 8th grade students are at the high school. Given our limited facilities in this area, to what extent would you separate middle school students from high school students, and why?
Yeah, one of the things that mobility and availability of content has allowed for us is to truly look at the developmental stages within a K-12 perspective. So when you think about that from an academic perspective, at least, you know, you have learn to read, read to learn, exploration, and then you start looking at college and career readiness and preparation. So one of the things that we did is we looked at that sort of as a K-1, 2. Then we looked at it as 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So in our view, by the time you got to 10th grade, you've already had the necessary preparation to begin to fine-tune some skills or aspirations on whether you want to go to a research university, whether you want to go to a technical school, whether you want to go into an apprenticeship and a trade program. And are we making sure those opportunities exist? So do we partner with some of our business community and so forth to make sure kids are having those kind of opportunities? But we know 8th and 9th is such a critical time, just them figuring out who they are, the whole development of self-awareness and so forth, and social awareness with others. And then, you know, that time period where they're learning, they're reading to learn. So now they know how to read, but now do you really know how to analyze? Do you really know how to synthesize? Do you really know how to take it to a whole other level in terms of developing your cognitive ability, using your cognitive ability to develop your knowledge? So I'm not as zeroed in. What's our structure? What's our plat with a brand new school and a high school next to it? How are we addressing sort of those key developmental stages? And does our grade level configuration actually do that? I had a rude awakening my first year as a principal. We had a second grader who was doing geometry. We don't have geometry teachers in second grade. And the gifted teacher was pulling her hair out. So we became the test case. What do we do with a Doogie Howser? Because we had one. So he spent 8 years, at least a portion of the day, at the high school until he graduated at 16 and went to Stanford. I kidded with his parents. I told him, I said, you know, we had to at least get him where he could drive, you know. And, I mean, he was an incredible kid. It was amazing, though, to watch that assimilation with the other kids in terms of this particular kid. So we met his needs, but we didn't compromise anybody else's, if that makes sense. So I think it's important that we look at the whole picture. What a great opportunity. K-12 is all right here, basically within the same framework. Are we going to meet the needs effectively throughout? You know, are we using our resources the best possible way for each one of the kids? So I do think developmentally, for the most part, 7th and 8th grade kids are different than 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. But I don't think all 7th graders are, and I don't think, so does that make sense? And I think there's probably some younger ones that, you know, cognitively, they're probably performing at a level that we probably got to pay attention to. And we've got some in the 10th grade that we probably got to deal with that as well. So I think it's a broader question, and I think that we'd want to hear some folks and to figure out what our best design might be for that. That was one of those things. I didn't answer this with the James Clemens thing, but it's kind of like that. They thought teacher-centered first because they had departments in each one of the pods. And then when we did the design and made it student-centered, that wasn't the case. It became career-focused in terms of your interest, and then all your content was right there in that one location, other than science, because you have to have special labs. But in terms of your other academic areas, kids kind of found a home. It was like a middle school type concept within a high school setting, but it met the needs of the kids. So that would be kind of what I'd look at in terms of, you know, and hear what people had to say. You know, it could be something that we might not be able to do where we want to go to start with. We may have to say, okay, 7th and 8th goes here. Let's continue to study this, though. Don't get too attached to your room just yet. We're continuing to study because this is a little bit of a process. If we want to be here, do we have the structure that's going to get us there? I know that if you want to change a culture, you have to change the structure. If you have the same structure, you won't change the culture. So,
Thank you.
look,
Okay, number 17, what strategies would you employ to increase enrollment, and what are your thoughts on open enrollment?
yeah, I think this is a great advantage of a city system to have an open enrollment process where kids who want to be here can come here if space is available. And so I do think that, as is already the case, but could be even more so, this becomes a place that folks really want to come to because they've heard one of our staff members talk about our school district. That's number one. This is not a digression. This is an actual experience. You know, my wife is a hairdresser, and the hairdresser network is pretty incredible. And we were also in the cheerleader network, and that's another pretty incredible network. So that gave my wife, the hairdresser, an opportunity to be in various situations and listen to various teachers from various school systems and schools. And the thing, because her husband was a school administrator, she really perked up, and she listened to all her clients who were teachers, and she listened to all these people who would talk about their school and their school district. The thing that she would always report back to me was, what do you know about this particular school? Because I just listened to a teacher who said that she would not send her kids to that school. And that's the school that she teaches at. Then she'd say, so-and-so loves their school. They're telling all their friends they need to be there too. That network, and to me, how your folks feel about your place is most important. The informal network that takes place has more to do with recruitment than any specific strategy that we might map out in some kind of plan, in my experiences. And then I've gone through that when new schools have opened up too. It becomes the place folks want to go. So, okay. That's a great question.
A little bit of a follow-up to that. Alabama has allowed charter schools to come in at some point in the near future.
Yeah.
What's your experience been with the charter environment?
Yeah, we started doing some of that some years ago in Georgia, and we created a commission at the state level that could approve a charter school if the local Board of Ed didn't approve it, so they had a way to go if they couldn't do it locally. There are good charter schools, and there are bad charter schools. And so whether you call it a charter school or a public school or a private school, there's a range of where they actually are, no matter what the perception may be. Historically, we sort of had charter schools back in the 40s in the state of Georgia. We had 1,241 school districts. So at that time, we had a lot of charter schools, but the reason that the consolidation efforts took place was because we weren't offering a fair experience for the majority of our kids. So if you had a rich neighborhood, you had a rich school and a good school. If you had a poor neighborhood, you had a poor school, and there wasn't really much sharing at that time. So then we consolidated and became 158 school districts, okay? Some of those city districts and some of those county districts. But that's a huge decrease from 1,241. So now what's happening is you've got folks who feel disconnected. So my experiences with charter schools, the number one reason that I hear from parents who are frustrated is that they feel a disconnection with their local public school. If they feel a connection to their local public school, there's really not many folks jumping up and down for a charter school in that location. And so that becomes a key issue. I think that we made some errors in Georgia, having done this, a few years ago, in trying to fight it instead of trying to understand it. So my sense of this, as Alabama now is starting into this process and has been, understand that the root of this is most likely disconnection. So how do you improve that? And if it's up to a local board to listen to petitions for charter schools, find out why it is that's taking place, and then, let's listen, and then let's make a good decision, recommendation, and so forth. But really work on connecting with our parents, because if they feel connected to their school, and then they hear other parents who want to come too. But I have had I debated one of the congressional representatives on this issue, and so that was and we were good friends, so it was an interesting debate, because I wouldn't get myself, I'm not against any schooling. I'm for learning for everybody, I'm a public school guy. I love public school is what's helped so many of us have a chance to, to be successful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Emily?
Providing all stakeholders with necessary and appropriate information regarding matters of the school system is critical. What are some examples of specific strategies you've used to promote public support for school activities, budget, and instructional programs?
Being involved outside of the school and outside of the school district. Going to the various government agencies, municipalities, service organizations, Kiwanis clubs, Rotary clubs, town functions, being that person who people begin to trust because you're right there with them, and if they have a question about what's going on, you're able to answer it. If you have some bad news that comes out and people just go, they ask you, and so you gain credibility by being part of the community, and having those conversations. Any opportunity possible, having an open door policy. Anybody can come and see you, with or without an appointment. Find the time to make sure that you answer and respond. And so I've been successful in doing that. And I tell you, and I've learned some things over time too from folks that really may have had a negative perspective because they asked a really, really hard question. And so, one example, I had a lady who was in Kiwanis Club with me, and she pulled her kids out of the public school, and this was early on in my administrative career. She pulled her kids out of public school and put them in a private school, and it made me sick. And because I thought she was because she was so involved and she was so supportive. And I asked her, I said, why did you do that? And she started tearing up a little bit, and she said, I've got 2 kids. I've got one that's a high achiever, and she's going to be successful, it doesn't matter. But I got a second one, and he's not. And he's all over the place. And I'm just worried that there's not going to be an adult that's going to see his needs. Whereas these folks over here aren't going to let him, they're not going to let him fail. They're not going to let him fall through the cracks. And that goes back to that A and D student conversation. Because in her mind, and truthfully speaking, we had become teach and test and hope for the best. Some years we got a good crew, some years I got a good class, some years I don't. It's the parents' fault. It's they don't have any money, they don't have this, they don't have that. So it became, we adopted a no excuses approach to how we worked with folks. Because I also challenged our folks, and I said, someone can make a decision to put their child in a school for whatever reason they want, but let it not be academic preparation. Let it not be that. It can be for other reasons, but let it not be because of academic preparation. So.
There's a second part to this
Okay.
too. How would you work to ensure all groups are fully engaged with schools and the system as a whole?
That's not a job for one person. That takes all of us. So what I would try to do in that regard is I would encourage and expect and equip all of us to have similar messages, to have similar information pieces that resonate with folks. What are our talking points? When you're asked this question, how are you going to respond, and do you believe it? Is that, it's based on fact, but do you believe it? And so I think that that's never a one person. That's a collective and important goal.
Any follow-up? Okay, Steve, you're number 19.
To what degree do you believe responsibilities can and should be delegated to principals?
Yeah, I think principals should be the CEOs of their schools. I think teachers should be the CEOs of their classrooms. And I think students should be the CEOs of themselves. And so that sort of sets the framework for the level of expectations and the support structures to help folks get there. When you're a CEO, you're accountable. And so it gives them a nice way to think about their role and their, and the expectations associated with that.
And it says, also follow up, provide examples of how you hold them accountable for accomplishing those responsibilities.
That goes back then to those key indicators of performance in terms of, okay, as a principal, how is the school performing? How are you doing? How's your team? Because they're part of a team as well. And, and the same as a classroom teacher. How's the performance of your students? How are you? And how's your team? And then with the student, the same thing. Only it's even more personal. So how are you in terms of your accomplishments, your efforts? What can we do to help you be successful? Because you have those folks too. So while you have here's sort of the principal, the teacher, the student. Then you have these folks in between their jobs are to help you be successful. So an assistant principal's job is to make sure the teachers are successful. So an intervention person or a counselor, their job is to make sure that the students are successful. And so that's their primary focus. They're not necessarily the lead being held accountable, but they're part of the support structure to make sure that everybody is successful.
Thanks.
All right. I believe we're on number 19 and a half, or 20.
20. All right, we're
Scared
almost
me there
there.
for a second there with 19 and a half.
We have 6 quality finalists for this position. Why should the board select you?
Well, they're all good folks. I mean, you've done a good job. You've got great candidates, and I appreciate being one of those 6. I think that one of the things I believe that I bring to the table is a record of performance where there's tangible results, where it's worst to first. It's sustainable. It's folks performing at levels that they didn't once before. And then creating that culture where that continues. And that's not been done just once or twice. So that's been done with groups of other people in other settings. And would love to have the opportunity to do that here. And so I think that I'm not a status quo kind of person. So I'm going to be somebody that's going to study what the highest performing districts on this planet are doing and finding those strategies that transfer most effectively to this school district. And I've committed my life to, trying to grow and develop. I'm better than I once was, but I'm not as good as I'm going to be. I think that's a country song somewhere, but that's the truth. So I do subscribe to Carol Dweck and her growth mindset approach. So I think if you're an educator and you don't have a growth mindset, there's a real disconnect. If you really believe that someone's ability to perform is limited based on poverty or based on upbringing, then how do you account for the folks that made it when they weren't supposed to? Something else happened. And so I think that all of us have a chance to grow. And I still remember my 3rd grade teacher. I don't even know who numbered 2nd grade and 1st grade. I don't even remember their names. But I remember Miss Burt in Des Plaines, Illinois. And when the kids in that school classroom were making fun of how I talked, and she reminded them that I was a really sharp guy in math. I didn't know that, but she knew that. And so that has always been, I think, why I'm in what I do. I think the other part is I'm a real connection kind of person. And so, my family settled in the early 1800s at the headwaters of the Coosa River. So where that wilderness area is that's where my bloodlines are, at least on my dad's side. And so I bring a sense of connectivity to this region of our country that I'm sure some of the other candidates do as well. But
That leads me to my next part.
sure.
As a superintendent, how important is it for you to live in Jacksonville?
Critical. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to do the stuff I was saying you got to do if you don't live here, you know, so you got to live here.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there any follow-up to any of that? If we go back to question number one, I had
No. He's joking.
I was trying to get ready.
Can you go over that well as possible?
we do want to ask you if you have any questions for us. At this time, just, did anything come up today that you want to ask us, or,
Well, not necessarily a question, but I do want to express a little bit from the observations that I had today. Just what a great experience, you know, and getting a chance to travel with Mr. Neighbors and meeting the staff and really getting a chance to interact in a way that I didn't necessarily expect, but I'm so grateful that I got a chance to do that. You have some tremendous people that are here who are passionate about what they're doing, who love kids. And those are key ingredients to be a great school district. So this isn't a situation that needs some kind of overhaul. This is a situation that probably just needs a little bit of tweaking, a little bit of vision work, a little bit of, you know, perspective. And I think it's a great place. And so I appreciate the opportunity to get to do that. So you should be proud of those folks. You've got some really good folks out there.
well, thank you, and we really appreciate you coming and being a part of the experience for today. And one of the things when we were concluding, I wanted to let you know we're trying to make a decision by October the 19th. And so we'll have a board meeting scheduled for that day. And we will be checking references and those
Sure.
kinds of things. So, but as far as anybody else have anything?
Yeah, what's his contact information for your third grade teacher?
Miss Burt,
That's good.
Miss Burt, Des Plaines, Illinois. She's retired now.
But Dr. Green, we really appreciate you and thank you for coming, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you all.
Thank you.